The Proclamation of 1763 closed off the new western frontier to the colonists. The king and his council said that it was to protect them from the Indians. The colonists felt that the goal was to keep them cooped up along the Atlantic seaboard so the British could more easily govern them. The Paxton Boys was a group that murdered 20 Native Americans. It was said to be done in response to the fear and hatred the Indians caused. It was a repercussion of the Proclamation of 1763. Their arrest was protested by 600 men. Benjamin Franklin prevented the protests from getting bloody. The Sugar Act was a tax that the British felt necessary for protecting and defending. The Molasses Act of 1733 never worked, so during the Sugar Act, they reduced the cost by half, and it was heavily enforced. Samuel Adams said that this went against the colonist rights. The Currency Act said that colonists could not print their own money and had to use British money. The Quartering Act required colonists to let British soldiers use their houses. The Stamp Act was a legislation that required a tax to be paid on the transfer of certain documents. Paid taxes were received in official stamps. John Adams and Patrick Henry opposed this act. The Stamp Act's Congress and its declaration. 9 colonies were in attendance. Delegates approved a 14-point declaration. These echoed the recent resolve of the Virginia's House of Burgesses.
The Declaratory Act was created by the British Parliament in 1766. It accompanied the revoke of the Stamp Act of 1765, and it also gave the other reason was the government revoked the Stamp Act because of the negative effects the boycotts had on the British trade. The Townshend Act was a series of laws in 1767 by the Parliament of Great Britain, and its purpose was to punish the province of New York and to make sure the British Parliament had the right to tax the colonies. British soldiers killed 5 civilian men in a riot against the British government, later known as the Boston Massacre. The Committee of Correspondence was a shadow government organized by the patriot leaders of the 13 colonies. They coordinated responses to Britain and shared their plans throughout the colonies. The objective of the Tea Act was to undercut the prices of tea smuggled into Britain's North American colonies. It also granted the company the right to directly ship its tea to North America. The Boston Tea Party was an action against the British government by the colonists who boarded the ship and dumped the tea into the harbor. The Sons of Liberty undertook the Boston Tea Party in 1773, which led to the Intolerable Acts.
The Intolerable Acts were passed by Parliament in 1774. They closed down the Boston port, banished town meetings, and put Massachusetts under martial law, and they also brought back the Quartering Act. These acts were in direct relation to the Boston Tea Party, and the colonists viewed them as violations of their rights and liberties, which also led to the First Continental Congress. Only 12 colonies participated in the First Continental Congress. Georgia was excluded because it was still seen as a convict colony. They met at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, and they met to consider the options of protesting against the Intolerable Acts, but they were unsuccessful in halting the enforcement of them. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked open arms conflict between the colonies and Britain. It happened in April of 1775. 700 British men went to Massachusetts in order to try and get their military supplies in Concord. The Massachusetts were outnumbered and fell back, but they gained men and eventually pushed the British back to Lexington. British was then saved by Lieutenant Percy's reinforcements, and numbering of 1,700 men pushed to the safety of Charlestown, and ultimately the colonists started the siege of Boston. The Second Continental Congress happened in May of 1775. The Congress managed war efforts and moved incrementally to independence. With the ratifications of the Articles of Confederation, they became known as the Congress of Confederation. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was published in January of 1776. It was an argument for freedom from the British when independence of the colonists was still undecided. It was effective because it was written in a style that common people could understand and ultimately led to a wider spread of revolting. The Declaration of Independence was a statement that announced 13 colonies were wanted to secede from Britain. It was written by Thomas Jefferson and originally published for the public to read, and ultimately became one of the most known documents in American history.